In this series, we will touch upon essential topics that shape our multicultural identity. We will explore the power of allyship, the importance of building an anti-racist Queensland, the beauty of intercultural encounters, and the significance of representation matters in our media landscape. So join us as we embark on this exciting journey, celebrating the rich tapestry of multicultural Queensland. Together, let's make a positive impact, foster understanding, and build a more united and inclusive community. Stay tuned for an enriching and enlightening podcast experience that embraces the essence of Multicultural Queensland Month. Allyship in Multicultural Queensland, building bridges, fostering inclusion. That's our topic for episode 1. On this podcast, we explore the concept of allyship and its significance in creating a truly inclusive and supportive community in multicultural Queensland. Join us as we engage in thoughtful discussions with individuals and experts who are actively practicing allyship and advocating for supportive change. Learn about the role of allies and supporting marginalised communities, promoting understanding and dismantling barriers. Together, let's discover the power of allyship and how it can contribute to a more united and compassionate Queensland for all. I'm your host, Real Manucci. Today on the panel, I've got Christine Mudavanhu and Eduardo Jordan, and I will let them introduce themselves. We can start with Christine.
Thank you, Real. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. Deeply grateful for this opportunity to discuss something that's really close to my heart, which is the topic of allyship. Just by way of context and background, my name is Christine Mudavanhu. For those of you who hail from Zimbabwe, my first name is Rudairo, if you can roll your R and pronounce that. I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. I am an advocate and I'm an advocate and a community champion, a business champion, a professional champion for women of color all around the world. My goal and my vision is how do we support more women, and particularly women of color, get into leadership positions, be it in business, be it in commerce, in whatever sphere they choose to be.
Okay, thank you.
Well, my name is Dr. Eduardo Jordan. I am the newsroom coordinator at Radio 4AB here in Brisbane, and I am also the executive producer of a national current affairs radio program called The Wire. My expertise is in journalism and radio as well, and I'm also the chair of the Media Diversity Australia Queensland chapter, which started probably in 2019 with a need of including more diverse voices in the mainstream media. We found out that there were not enough voices at that time, so we are trying to include and starting these conversations about representation in the media. I am also I came in 2010 to Australia as an international student from Mexico, and the rest is history. So I'm here. Thank you for the invitation.
All right, awesome to have you all here. And we're just going to go right into this. And basically, the topic today is about allyship. And I will ask, starting from Eduardo, what allyship means to you and how you see it playing a role in fostering inclusion in Queensland.
Oh, that's a very interesting question, because allyship it's touching a lot of it's a holistic concept in itself, I guess. And please correct me, Christine, if you don't agree with this one. Basically, allyship is having a deeper understanding about someone else who has a different background or has a different different situation, I guess, from where you're coming from. For instance, in my case, as Mexican gay person, I would have liked in the past to have more allies, whether from the LGBTIQ plus community. There were some issues there with me that I couldn't come out and say, well, this is who I am, just because I was not out of the closet yet. But also, I've noticed as well that during these probably 3 years, we're talking a lot about representation and we're talking about diversity, but we're not talking about allyship. What I think it's happening is, oh yeah, we'll talk about representation, etc. We're just throwing CAL communities, or people of color, people of different nationalities, let's say, do all the work, and then excluding the rest of the people. We cannot be excluded. I mean, at the end of the day, we live in a community, and we need to collaborate each other. So I do believe that allyship is a way of collaboration to achieve a goal. And how do I see it playing a role in fostering inclusion in Queensland? I think it's a critical role, especially in my area, media, because you've seen in, television and some other online spaces where there's not enough representation. But also we need from the Anglo-Celtic community, let's say, of the non-CAL communities, we need the support from them as well. We've been trying so hard to get into the media. We've tried to do the same things as some other people would do, but we have different challenges. English as a second language. We have all the challenge of the culture, that we need to learn more about the culture, and that's taking a time. So I think allyship, that's where allyship comes from. And say, well, maybe you don't understand this. Let me explain to you. This is what's happening. You can do this, etc. But also including them in the workspace. It's very, very critical, because we've heard a lot as well in the workplace. You need the Australian experience. What does an Australian experience mean? And we think it's basically similar, but it's completely different. But also it has a lot of questions there, I guess. And that's when the allyship, I believe, is when it comes into the equation, where both of us, these two worlds can collaborate to each other to achieve a goal. And that's really good. And for example, with MDA Queensland, that's what we're doing. And we hope that we are bringing these conversations about representation. Basically, it's like a United Nations convention there. There's only one Anglo-Celtic person helping us there, but it's always fantastic to see those viewpoints, and that we are collaborating and understanding each other to make a goal achievable. So I believe that allyship for me is include everyone so we can work together.
And what would be your take on that, Christine?
So for me, the word allyship, it's an ally. It's the person whose side you're on. It's a person who an ally is a person who, in my mind, has been afforded a certain level of privilege within a group, right? And privilege looks different in any cohorts, right? If I take myself, for example, in my cohort, I have certain elements of privilege, in the sense that for me, English is not a second language. I've been bilingual since birth. I've been able to speak English fluently in any environment, everywhere. I enjoy the privilege of not having a very strong accent. So a lot of the judgments and the prejudice that normally go with that, I have not experienced in that way, even though I am a person of color coming from a culturally and linguistically diverse background. I've also grown up with a lot of confidence, had, a stable family, had, the ability to be supported in the ways that, help you to quote unquote, set you up with a strong foundation. So that gives you a certain level of privilege, right? And I think in every conversation, an ally comes to it with a certain level of privilege, other than, the visible characteristics, which is, we normally talk of white privilege, which is normally what most people associate with the word privilege, but you need to think broader than that. So I guess an ally to me is a person who comes into a situation and, as the word defines, walks alongside of you and doesn't actually take it on as their own, right? Because they create the space for the person who is from a minority background, or in a marginalized situation, because you don't necessarily have to be from a minority background to be marginalized in a situation. However, in the context of what we are talking about people from multicultural background. And Eduardo touched on a core concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is intersectionality. So intersectionality is those layers of disadvantage. So within a group, there are many other different factors, right? We're not all the same. There is an experiment that talks about, kids on the starting line, and because of different social advantages that they've had through no fault of their own, are further in the starting block of life than other people are. And so those ones who are further along then come and sit alongside of you as an ally, to be able to support you in a way that edifies and amplifies your voice. So I think, as an ally, when you're walking into a situation, what makes you a really good ally is, first of all, ask the question, what can I contribute here in terms of how do I create space? How do I allow my idea of what this minority group that I'm helping to champion here once heard, but how do I create space coming from my podium of privilege, right? How do I create space that allows a minority group to be able to use their own voice to amplify their message? So I think it's always really, really critical, because what gets lost sometimes in the allyship conversation is the message of the ally is then what gets heard. So if I use an extreme example, right, the allies invaded like your Afghanistan, right? And they were there to liberate people. And I'm simplifying this. I'm making this so simplistic, right? It's more complicated than that. But there to liberate people. But you're doing it according to what you think is right for you. And you're imposing a certain way of living on the people that you have come to sit alongside and support. And that's not allyship, right? Allyship is where I come and I stand next to you and I step back and I allow space for you and your voice to be heard, for issues to be addressed in your way and addressed at your time. So for example, Eduardo, you were talking about, growing up as somebody from, a Mexican background. You had not come out of the closet. You were obviously facing some challenges with that in your own space. As an ally, all that's required of me is to come and sit alongside of you and ask the question, okay, what would support look like for you? What do you need? How can I help? And really then step back and allow you to step into that, rather than me amplify my agenda and amplify my voice or address the issue in the way I perceive it should be addressed. To me, that's not allyship. That's just me touting off my horn and using my podium of privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic definition, and I think you put it in better words than what I did. So I appreciate all that. I also wanted to touch on the allyship. I mean, you are absolutely right. It's just an allyship is ways on how to give to amplify the voice of those who are usually marginalized, or who doesn't have like a space or a platform to amplify their voices. What I just want to add on that is maybe not just it's not also making the other people minimize their voices. It's more about just a construction and a discussion about that.
Yep.
So we can agree on a point. So that's the only point that I would like to add, because it's very interesting because when you say, oh, allyship, some people believe that, okay, I need to be quiet and just allow you to do all the things. That's not what I'm looking for, or what we're not looking for. What we would like to do is collaborate and then achieving a goal, for XYZ activity, or amplifying the voices, etc. That's what allyship looks like for me. But it's not about making someone else minimize someone else just because we are not part of the majority of the community. Is come and join us, and let's have a chat about this.
Okay, so just to ask, my understanding from what you both said, like trying to put it the simplest way possible, is like allyship is more like advocacy for equity. Basically generalizing it, like it's not bordered by race, gender issues. It's just being able to stand, next or behind whoever is marginalized and being able to give them the support they need. So advocacy for equity, wrong or right? I'm trying to summarize it.
You're right, Real, in the sense that if you've noticed the conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, they've really focused on equity and introduced the new word belonging and having the inclusion aspect of it. So really, as what Eduardo was saying around that, don't minimize and dim the voice and the light of the minority group that you're coming to support. Actually, that light should become brighter. So think of yourself as an ally, as a fertilizer, right? You're coming to sit alongside and fertilize and help to grow, help to nurture, help to incubate. So you very much should be in the background, right? As an ally, if you're really doing allyship well, we should know you. We should know what you're talking about. We should know the people you're advocating for. We shouldn't know you as the ally, because your message is not what's important. It's the message of the people that you're supporting that's important. That's what true allyship to me looks like.
Oh, that's actually great. Thank you for sharing that. And is there any experiences or any what you call it, like, is there any particular research or anything you've witnessed that effectively shows allyship in action, and how it positively impacted, if it's a multicultural community, how it impacted them, or whichever community, like, so just an example to see how effective allyship can be.
What?
All right. I do have a couple of examples here, and it's more of a case study in my workplace here at Radio 4EB. I usually work with a lot of volunteers, and it's a high rotated position because they're volunteers, they're students, and also, well, internship, it's just a simple amount of time or X amount of time where I have to work with them, develop their skills into journalism, etc. So it's very interesting because I got an international student last year, probably around September, October. This student needed around 50 hours of internship. So she did that internship through her university and came to me and said, well, I have no idea about, how to create a radio story, or I have no idea on how to, I have no idea about journalism. Like, okay, so what are you studying? What are you doing? Et cetera, et cetera. So I sat down with the student. I started to chat with her about what we were doing, et cetera. English at the beginning was a little bit broken because the student is Chinese and she was handling with a lot of the Chinese group, which is understandable. It's your culture. You want to speak your own language at times, et cetera. And after the first or second session, I gave some feedback to the student and say, well, you will need to do this. It's important for you to have these skills. I would suggest you to, listen to podcasts, watch TV, read in English, etc. So your English starts to come out and bloom. A couple of weeks later, this student came around with such a huge confidence in herself that she produced several stories for the radio program, and also I invited her to host the show. And every challenge that I faced to her, like saying, I need you to voice a show, or I need you to do this story, etc. She was very confident, but also shy at the same time. So I was there and say, well, I think you can do it. I'm more than happy to help you with all this. And let's work together to have that job done. A couple of weeks ago, she voiced the second program. She had a great voice on radio. Yeah, she was a little bit nervous, but also it reminded me of what I produced and voiced the show for the first time, where I sounded like really bad crap. And I'm just trying to make it as simple and as productive as possible with potential international students or Australians with a CAL background, to amplify their voices and be confident about that, what they can do. For me, as a Mexican person living in Australia, I mean, well, I don't want to say that I'm a perfect allyship, but I'm trying to be as an ally as possible to empower those voices, because I got that empowerment with my previous producers at that time, and they gave me the enough tools to say, well, embrace it. You have a different accent. It's always good to have that, and it's we're empowering you to do all these stories to be a better journalist. And that's what I'm trying to replicate with the rest of my volunteers, particularly with those with English as a second language or any other culturally and linguistically diverse background. So I think that's more or less the closest example that I can provide here in this in the podcast.
All right, thank you for that, Eduardo. And with Christine, I kind of know your background quite a lot, and I know you're doing a lot of work. We need the one that you're most proud of, the one that shows effective allyship.
Yeah, so I think the question was in two parts. Just correct me if I got wrong. But part was what research, and then what practical examples. So in terms of research, if people are wanting to read, McKinsey's done quite a lot of research in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, and they have released a number of reports. And also lean in, I'm sure you've heard of Sheryl Sandberg, who used to work with Mark Zuckerberg as the CIO of Facebook, or Meta, as it's now called. And she has set up a foundation around gender equity and actually partners with McKinsey on doing gender equity studies. So they actually have a whole truckload of research around allyship and its effectiveness, particularly for women leaders, when they come into an organization, how having a male ally sit alongside them, particularly in leadership position, actually advances careers, provides confidence. You have somebody that you can confidentially sound ideas to until you get to that space where you are, confident, able to stand on your own 2 feet, because the air is still very thin up there in the leadership space for women. On a practical level, in terms of examples, so I run the Queensland chapter of Migrant Women in Business, which is a national organization that is got its biggest base in Melbourne, where our CEO, Luz Restapo, who is from Colombia, she is based there. And so the biggest thing for me being an ally is with my clients in that space. A lot of the times you will see the brand. You may see me occasionally post about it on social media, but 90% of the time, if you go on the website, it's about the women. Right? It's the women whose voices that we're amplifying. It's their products, it's their services. We are there to sit alongside women who are based on perceived disadvantage. And I say perceived because if you flip that round and you take it in a different context, it is an advantage in those contexts, right? They have really managed to shine simply because they've been given an opportunity and had people who believe in them. And again, had people who didn't have an agenda to advance their own, but had the agenda to advance them. So I would say for me, a lot of the work that I do around migrant women in business, both as the national part of the national network, but also part of what I do in Queensland, that's where, there's a multitude of case studies in there around how effective allyship looks when you stand alongside a fellow woman of color. You understand the challenges. All of us from multicultural backgrounds, while we come from different backgrounds, there's a commonality that binds us. We all understand the sense of community that we've been raised with. We all understand you don't talk back to your elders. I don't care which brown version you come from, you don't backchat your elders. We all understand respect. We understand community, how to support one another. And we all understand how it is to come to a space that is not your home and try to make it your home and still have responsibilities back home. We all understand those. Those are commonalities that we have. But in and amongst that, how do we sit amongst each other and support each other to be our best versions of themselves? And now those examples with the women in the migrant women in business programs in its various iterations, I would say for me are examples of where allyship is working and working quite effectively from my perspective.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So we're just going to switch it up a little bit, and I'm going to ask, what are the most common misconceptions and or challenges surrounding allyship in a culturally diverse context, and how can we overcome them? Anyone? Any takers?
I was waiting for Eduardo because I was kind of doing the turn, your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn.
No. All right. No. If I'm happy to start. I believe that, as I mentioned before, one of the big misconceptions around allyship is, I need to support this person, but I need to minimize my voice. I don't think everyone has an opinion, everyone has a voice, everyone, there are platforms there to get the voice. But as Christine said, it's important to check the privilege of each person so we can be a proper ally. The other challenge as well is that most people who claim to be allies, they're not. There's a misconception about the definition. And I think we need to start opening the conversation about how to be an effective ally rather than how to be an ally. Because we don't have this concept of allyship in an appropriate way, and that could lead to different, I think, probably results or even a misconception about what it is. I believe so. I think that's one of the big challenges. At least I don't have an example at this moment of what I'm saying, but how can we overcome it? It's just starting the conversation and start allowing the person who doesn't have that privilege, listen to that person, have a chat with them, listen, look, how can I support you? Like what Christine said, how can I support you so you can shine and so you can be more effective, or you have your voice amplified on any platform. So I think that's one of the major things. I know this is very simplistic. Have a listen to it, but not a lot of people listen, and not a lot of people have the time to listen. Those people as well, like people in executive positions in different businesses and companies, etc. They don't really have time, or they don't really care about being an ally, an ally to their employees. So we need to change that. I believe, and we need to start creating conversation about how we can support people in disadvantage to have a platform and amplify their voices.
Okay, pretty awesome. Christine, you have anything to add?
I think from sort of my perspective, I agree with a lot of what Eduardo is saying around effective allyship. I think one of the things, and that's why initially it was good to anchor it in a definition of what does an actual ally look like? Because if you're coming alongside to sit alongside people and make a difference, it means your agenda is taking a back seat. Now, let's face it, everybody has an ego, right? And everybody wants to get credit for what it is that they've done. And if you remember earlier on, I did say that if you are doing allyship properly, you should know who you are, right? If you actually 100% doing it properly, you shouldn't be getting an accolade for being an ally. The cause that you're supporting and the people that you're supporting are the ones that should be getting an accolade. So I think the more that we can lean into losing, so for those of us who are in those collective positions of privilege where you see yourself sitting alongside a marginalized group, if you can I guess reach that self-actualization space where you can not make it about yourself and really actually make it about the cause or the person or the group of persons or the issue that you're following about, and ask yourself, how do I and my ego become completely invisible in this space? And how do I shine a light that is so bright on this issue without me necessarily taking the credit for it? And that's a really hard concept. And it's really hard balancing act to do that, right? Because sometimes, like, I'll give you an example that's visible. Oprah Winfrey came on board to be a massive ally of girl education, right? With her Angel Network, she set up, most people would know, she set up a famous school in South Africa, where it's almost cult-like, you know, the girls go to school with these green and white uniforms, everything is the Oprah way, and all of this and all of that. And so this is somebody who's coming alongside the issue of the marginalization of girls' education, right, in African countries. And it's no secret that in some cultures within third world countries, not all cultures, some, because I didn't grow up in that culture personally. You know, there's no planet my brother gets a better anything than me in our house. That's how I was raised. You know, I find the thought actually quite absurd. You know, that could be a suggestion. And so would my father, but that is who I was raised by. So I realized that that is a privilege. That is not what everybody enjoys. So then when you're coming in and you're sitting alongside a country that is going through that, Oprah needed to spotlight her role as an ally, right? So she really needed to magnify that, right? So she could get the funding, right, for the school. So she could get the application from the Ministry of Education. She leveraged her relationship with Nelson Mandela. And you've heard some of the stories of the girls' success, but it's mostly been about Oprah's success in terms of that school. Does that make sense? Because if I was to ask, a couple of people, like there's 2 or 3 girls who are quite famous, who visit her all the time, who went to her leadership academy that the world knows, but the majority of those girls are invisible to the world. So it kind of goes against the definition that I said of what true allyship is. But if you asked Oprah, she would tell you that she is very much an ally of amplifying the voice of girls' education in marginalized third world countries. I've built a school, right? A way that you can achieve the same thing is you have so many philanthropics around the world, so many philanthropic organizations. The Scanlon Foundation has funded the program that I run for migrant women in business. Anthea Franklin is the chair. She has funded, that program for over 5 years. Nobody knows who she is, right? But everybody knows who the women are. Do you see what I mean? In terms of the definition of allyship. So I'm not saying that Oprah's definition of allyship is wrong. I'm just saying that in how you sit alongside of that and how you amplify the voices of the marginalized communities, you need to find that balance between, amplifying your own voice and amplifying the voice of the communities that you're actually advocating for. And that can be a challenge, particularly if you're a celebrity and you're really, really famous, because then otherwise it becomes the famous celebrity and this is the good thing that you've done, but we don't really get to know about what is the outcome of the actual thing that you're advocating for. I hope that makes sense with that example.
It makes sense, but your answer just collided with my last question. You like literally just went in there. So I'll read the question first and then kind of get to where it collides. So as we strive for a greater allyship, what role do you believe institutions and organizations can play in promoting and encouraging allyship practices within Queensland? For me, with the example that you gave of Oprah, I feel she's an institution.
She's an institution.
And I feel
you know how much of an institution she is.
And I feel like, you know, I in this question, that is one way that Oprah used her institution. What are other ways that, you know, governments or people, you know, can use these institutions to be able to be better allies?
Yeah, I think I might start off just because I've got a train of thought around institutions. I think when I gave the Oprah example, I just want to caveat before I have everybody troll me, right? I love Oprah. I follow her. I love her. I was just trying to illustrate a point. Okay, so don't troll me. Thank you. Having said that to the Oprah fan club, back to answering Real's question, right? Institutions play a vital role, right? But systemic change takes time. And the institutions were set up to benefit the majority. The institutions were never set up to benefit a minority. Name me an institution, anyone, that was set up to benefit a minority. There's none. Governments, right? Who rules governments? People who are elected by a popular vote to represent, right? To represent a people in a room that we call a parliament. Right? So you find that institutions are riddled with elitism, right? Because they are run by the elite, right? Those who have privileges, right? Any institution, be it a religious institution, anything. And a lot of the good that is in institutions actually gets weaponized against minorities, right? And it's that weaponization for me that I think gets institutions then to be looked at consistently in a negative light in terms of how they do not support or do not come on board as allies, right? And I'll explain what I mean by that. Take, for example, the inherent racism that is structurally riddled in a lot of Western society. That is a long-term legacy of colonization, right? Whether you like it or not, whether you want to believe it, whether you want to acknowledge it, that's what it is. Because if you go back to the history of how those institutions were set up, they were set up to benefit the white privilege, right? And so that has just grown over time. How that privilege looks has just changed, but the fundamentals on which those institutions were based on hasn't changed. Take it even as a church. I'm a Christian, but even you know, the church, the faith organizations, the way that you look at how they've been set up, they have been set up to benefit that elite. So then when you come in and you're a marginalized group and you're sitting alongside and you're going against that, it's then difficult to see how that institution can come alongside of you and be in support of you. So I think for me, there is a fundamental reflective look that institutions need to take around looking at the actual essence or the bedrock that they are built on, right? Once you understand the bedrock that you're built on, then you can be 100% honest about the values that are riddled within your organization that actually promote marginalization of the groups that you say you're advocating for. And if you can then be that radically honest, then you can start to dismantle your institution and look at how you can bring in power. So for example, I'll give you one small example of what I mean. If you look at the Global Aid Foundation, right? The UN, whatever it is, right? They set up to keep people in poverty, It is, whichever way you look at it, right? Yes, there's a lot of people who benefit, and there's a lot of people whose lives get better, right, as a result of a one-off program, but they're very much in the minority, right? The majority are still cycling in a lot of those situations, right? Why is that? Because fundamentally, at its core, a charity is meant to come and sit alongside of you, pity you. And if you think about it at its fundamental core, right? Whereas if you're really wanting to empower the people, right, there's some charities now who are saying, we have the power here, right? Instead of me coming alongside and being a white knight and a savior, how about I give the money to the leaders in the community, right? And those leaders in the community, we step away, right? And those leaders in the community actually decide what the priorities are for those communities, not us coming in. We don't hold it over your head that it's money that we've given you. It's money that was owed to you anyway because of the years of disadvantage that you've had. It's quite a different and radical way of looking at how institutions can come in alongside and change the fundamentals by looking at things differently. I think we're a long way away from such radicalization. I think what we can slowly do is within institutions have radical and honest conversations about how are we perpetuating marginalization by the way that we are set up, and how can we continue to have those conversations. And I think because we're still at the genesis of those conversations, I think more conversations, so podcasts like this, Real, so thank you very much for inviting me, conversations around how do people in minority groups actually feel, and letting them speak for themselves. And don't make assumptions. We're not all cut from the same cloth. Actually listen to what people are saying and what is it that people actually want that are in those communities, and then amplifying that rather than the agenda of the institutions that I may represent. And that takes time. That takes setting aside ego. That takes, being very reflective. That also takes a level of self-awareness and self-actualization, which I don't know if as a society we actually have yet.
I do believe that every business or company should hire Christine's services as giving this magnificent speech, because it's all true. I think it's 100% true. I think it sums it up. The only thing that I would like to add on that, besides that, out of the joke, it's businesses and institutions should stop being tokenistic.
What is tokenistic? Sorry, for me.
Like being just adding someone because of the token, like just to fulfill. Okay. Oh, I need to bring, someone from this. Oh, I need to bring a woman into the team because it will bring diversity when everyone else is straight white men in the board. We need to understand that tokenism is not allyship. I think Christine just summed it up really, really well, and that's pretty much it. I think I have nothing else to say.
Okay. Any? To be very honest, I'm literally blown away. Literally blown away. And just as a closer, is there anything else any one of you want to say? The last, pin in the.
Just thank you, Real. Thanks for providing a platform where we can have, these conversations. I think these are conversations we need to have more of. We need to bring, different thought leaders to the fore and hear different perspectives and truly challenge the narrative, and also ask ourselves, well, what is our motivation for being here? Because I think if we can sit in that level of honesty and be really clear about that and have more open discussions about that, that's when we'll start to see a bit of change.
I'm very happy, guys. Eduardo?
Just basically, we will need all these conversations. It will be baby steps at the beginning, and it will become more and more obvious the more we speak about it. History has taught us, that we can change. We are shifting into a, you know, thinking about others and being an effective ally for those marginalized. There will be always some people with less privilege than us, so these conversations will need to continue existing anyway. But I believe we're working towards that. It's like Christine said, it's a long way to get until these systemic issues are within institutions and organizations, but we need to start talking about this. So I appreciate the invitation to this podcast. Really, I appreciate it. It's been amazing and great to have to hear Christine. Is just like refreshing and fantastic. So thank you so much.
All right. And I will say thank you, guys. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your boldness, both of you. And, most of this is usually hard topics to talk about for most people in general. And I'll be very honest, people, including me, myself. And I thank you guys for giving me that, that courage and having this opportunity to sit here with you. And yeah, I look forward to sharing this with the world.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Will.
Eduardo, for your time.
Nice to meet you, Christine. Thank you so much. We'll keep in touch.
We will.
Bye.
Thanks, Real.
The intention of this podcast is to celebrate the cultural diversity and inclusivity of Queensland, Australia during Multicultural Queensland Month. It aims to promote and appreciate the contributions of diverse cultural communities while fostering social cohesion among people from all backgrounds. The podcast, in collaboration with Radio 4EB and the Queensland Government's Multicultural Affairs Queensland, will cover various topics such as allyship, building anti-racist Queensland, intercultural encounters, and the importance of representation matters in the media landscape. Through engaging discussions and inspiring stories, the podcast seeks to create awareness, understanding, and appreciation for multiculturalism, ultimately working towards a more inclusive and harmonious Queensland for all.